Do you see the Leafs and Kyle Dubas looking at defensive ads, and is it a more significant ad, more of a depth ad? I know one position is going to affect how you address another, but how do you see the Leafs approaching the deadline when it comes to their defensive core?
I think it's going to be a depth ad. Certainly a piece that could be slightly better than the 5-6, but plays the 5-6.
Mm-hmm.
Um, a lot of it's going to come down to chemistry. Like, I actually do think right now, outside of Jake Muzzin, which we'll get clarity on later at the end of the month, that the 6 guys that they have right now is the optimal look. Like, there's really not much of a debate that since TJ Brody's been back, it's stabilized Morgan Riley in that defense
Yeah.
pair. They like Giordano with Hall, and then they like Sandin with Liljegren. And then really it's just a matter of, if you add someone, are you adding someone because they're going to be a better player? Or are you adding someone out of insurance that could play the increased minutes should one of those guys get hurt? And because of the way they played with all those man games lost, plus some of the other guys that they do have that have been good for them, found gems in Connor Timmins to some degree and Jordy Ben for the physical presence if they need to insert that I don't think they really need to swing for the fences for someone big in that regard. Um, you do want to have the depth. That's going to be something that they do look to. But I think in terms of the big pieces that they do, in terms of what will cost the most, it's probably going to be somewhere in that top 6. Because, for the most part, they can be okay. But to bank on Bunting and Yarncroke together, not having any sort of slip or drop off between now and the end of the season, one or the other, plus other injuries that may come, is probably not how you want to look at your top 6 right now. So getting a bona fide left winger who can play with the core 4 players, I think, is probably going to be their most expensive acquisition between now and March 3rd.
Yeah, I think the easy gaps are definitely up front. I was also going to say to you, because it's a big debate, because do they upgrade defense significantly, or if they go for that depth ad, like you just listed it, they have 8 caliber or NHL caliber defensemen right now. So it's like you add another depth guy, you have 9. I do think with Sandy and Liljegren, that's the case of, like, I love watching them play. Like, eye test, and obviously there's a lot of stats to back it up, but even the chemistry for those 2 guys has been huge. But going back to that Boston game, I wonder if that's the conversation. Like, okay, they look great. They've looked great in the season, but when it comes to the Tampa Bays and the Bostons of the world, can those 2 guys together handle that load, especially if they get a bad matchup and Pasternak, Marchand, Bergeron comes over the bench? Then is that a different conversation with Sandy and Liljegren on the ice together?
Yeah, well, and the other thing too is, remember, Rasmus Sandin didn't play in the playoffs last year because he had that injury, even though he was healthy enough.
And Liljegren was benched after game 2.
Exactly. So putting them together for what will be a redemption and previous lack of playoff experience could be pretty dicey. That may be getting a depth playoff experience defenseman to be in there just in case. I mean, Jordy Ben's got playoff experience. So there is that element to it as well. Connor Timmins does not. So that's really why you want to grab another depth defenseman.
Have you been on the... Sorry, keep going.
We all know that right now, the game that they're playing right now compared to what the game's going to be in the playoffs, it's going to be very different. Like, that's just the truth of it. And so as well as you can prepare between now and then, the stresses of it aren't going to be tested until the first couple of games. And if a change has to be made to Sandy Liljegren and they don't address it, what are you doing? Like, it's kind of difficult to address.
I was going to say, Leafs Twitter's always been talking about Luke Schenn. Have you been on that train?
I haven't, but Henny has. Henny brings it up a lot on the Rink Wide Toronto podcast. It makes sense. It's really funny since 2007, when I first started covering the Leafs, even as a general Toronto assignment reporter, I can't recall a situation of a player who's ever left that didn't leave because he was beloved, but left because he didn't live up to the expectations. I have never seen that situation where the player comes back as a different person and it could work. I think it could in Luke Schenn's case, because so much has happened there that I don't think a lot would be asked of him. and the regime and who's there compared to when he started is totally different. Like it's a complete about face in terms of who's there. But aside from that, I've never seen it. Like I remember even looking at goaltender options in the off season and seeing
like Reimer.
seeing James Reimer being thrown around as a potential tandem. I'm like, yeah, okay, like I'd like it, but like that hasn't happened, and I don't know if we're ready for it.
Well, everyone's been talking about JVR right now,
right?
Yeah,
like
that's another one,
right? Like so, like all these things. I don't know. Like I just don't see it anywhere else in the league where that's happened and it's worked. So like that's not saying it can't work. And the Leafs, if this regime has done anything, it's they've gone against the grain and have pulled off the unexpected to do things that are unique and can pull off things sometimes. But I just don't know if that works for them. And so Luke Schenn, I think, would be a great ad. He's definitely got the playoff experience down pat now in that 5-6 role with Tampa. So it makes sense in that regard. It's like he would be the most likely in that regard. But I guess it would just depend on cost. If the cost is anything beyond a fourth rounder, I don't know if they do it. So go ahead.
Yeah, the other thing is too, David. It's like you got to, we know it's Toronto and Tampa, and for the Leafs, you always want to be guarding yourself and trying to get ahead of Tampa in terms of moves that they would want to make.
I know where Luke
and Tampa wants Luke Schenn. Like Tampa,
and Boston wants Luke Schenn. Everyone wants
Boston wants Luke Schenn. So it's almost like blocking that sort of deal. But I agree with what you were saying earlier, John, where it seems interesting to me that they would want to bring in, another depth guy when they already have 8, because now you're at 90, as opposed, maybe that does make some sense if they use one of their defensive chips in a forward trade, like Sandin's going out the door in a forward deal, right? Then you would need to fill the gap. But as far as the depth that are out there on the market, like once you get past Jake McCabe and Gavrikov, like the bigger pieces, who's really out there? Like Edmondson is a guy that I know is out there, and maybe
unless the Chychrun trade finally drops.
Chychrun's at the top, obviously, of that list, but there's not too many guys that I look at and I think are better than what they have at all, right?
I mean, like this is the real thing, and the other thing too is, I mean, you brought up a good point when it comes to who the Leafs might have to acquire and stuff, and they're at 49 of 50 contracts.